Hello everyone and welcome to my YouTube channel. In this video, we will continue with the third part of the series, How does money and our global economic cycle work? It starts right after the intro. Stay tuned.
Insights for the informed investor.
Public debt. Germany has no debt. Many people believe this, but do they really know what they are talking about? Because Germany does have debts. You have to bear one thing in mind. When politicians go into an election campaign, long-term developments in a country tend to play a secondary role. Numerous economists have analyzed Germany's economic system and are threatening gloomy prospects. As ordinary citizens, all you see is the rosy facade that is repeatedly discussed in the media. This facade consists primarily of the fact that very high surpluses are being generated. There are also tax breaks and pension relief. That all sounds great, doesn't it? Interest expenditure on debt will rise again as early as 2020. From 2030, this could lead to a large gap between the national budget and the actual national debt. Germany's current debt ratio is not 10 or 5%, but a whopping 68% of gross domestic product. This does not even include civil servants' pensions and other social expenditure. If these are included, the actual debt figure for 2017 is 161%. This figure will continue to rise as social security contributions and pension obligations increase. But let's get back to the point. A currency reform has never led to a country being able to free itself from its debt ratio. What historical examples are there to support this thesis? You only have to look back to the Weimar Republic. After it was proclaimed, there was a currency reform. However, the existing national debt increased so that the demands could no longer be met, and hyperinflation finally set in. One margarine cost several million Reichsmarks. The most recent example is the introduction of the euro. In order to equalize the value of the euro and the German mark, the purchasing power of the German mark was reduced. The actual value of the money in circulation was reduced. People didn't really notice this at the time. But what were the consequences of such an equalization? This is relatively simple. The harmonization meant that Germany's actual economic strength was diminished. Considering that disruptive technologies are constantly evolving and that Germany cannot really gain a foothold in this sector, the outlook is anything but rosy. When people are confronted with such a fact, they don't want to admit it. Why? Quite simply, they don't want to accept the fact that crises have to occur again and again in order for the current economic system to function. Moreover, very few people have a precise understanding of the various economic systems in Germany. Just look at the tax system. If everyone could fill in and submit their own tax return, we would have a much simpler tax system. The profiteers. If the system is designed so that a large part of the burden has to be borne by the middle class, who benefits from such a system? Even if it sounds like a standard answer at first, it is primarily the rich people who benefit from this system. If you have looked at the development of the abolition of coal-fired power plants, then you will understand what is meant by this. The rich people in Germany create jobs, which is essential for the German economic system. The German economy also depends in part on these jobs, because if these jobs are lost, the unemployed people have to be financed with social benefits, which is an enormous burden. When the coal phase-out was planned, RWE became involved. RWE is a huge company that creates many jobs. It threatened that many jobs would be lost if the coal-fired power plants were abolished. Ultimately, this effect led to the coal phase-out being extended. A simple effect, which Abe mainly based on the fact that rich people and large corporations in Germany are the real drivers of economic policy. The same scandal also occurred with Opel and other large lobbies. The hyperinflation. Everyone has probably heard of hyperinflation. After all, it is not a foreign concept in Germany. Just remember the hyperinflation of the Weimar Republic. But when were the first hyperinflations? There have been a total of 56 hyperinflations worldwide. The worst of these are presented below. The hit list of hyperinflations is headed by the hyperinflation in Hungary. Here, inflation lasted just under a year and caused the economy as a whole to experience a price increase of almost 207%. This figure is not given on a monthly or annual basis, but on a daily basis. Prices doubled every 15 hours during this inflation. Of course, the German hyperinflation is also one of the worst inflationary periods in the world to date. To be more precise, the inflation from August 1922 to December 1923 is one of the 5 worst inflationary periods in the entire world. The highest inflation rate measured at that time was 29,500%. Converted to a daily basis, the inflation rate amounted to 20.9%. Prices doubled within 4 days. Money was generally losing value faster than it could be spent. Many people have experienced the most recent period of inflation. We are talking about the inflation episode of 2007, when hyperinflation took place in Zimbabwe, Africa, from March 2006 to mid-November 2008. Daily inflation rates here amounted to 98%, and prices doubled every 25 hours. The long-term consequences of such inflation crises have not yet been precisely analyzed. However, the course of events after such a crisis is almost always the same. The currency is abolished, and a currency reform is carried out. This is the only way to ensure that prices stabilize again. However, if you take a closer look at this process, it is a case of market intervention. Market interventions always harbor risks that only become apparent later. If hyperinflations are so bad, surely there must be measures that can be taken to prevent such periods of inflation. Many people do indeed ask themselves this question. The various possible solutions are examined in more detail below. In order to avoid hyperinflation, a corresponding equivalent value must be created for the money in circulation. How can this be achieved? The simplest solution would be to invest gold as a countervalue for the cash. However, the gold reserves on Earth cannot cover the money in circulation. This is due to the fact that the current economic policy has almost printed money non-stop. This mistake then becomes apparent in the periods of inflation that occur every few decades. Although hyperinflation actually affects everyone, there are still institutions and groups that profit from hyperinflation. One major institution that benefits from hyperinflation is the bank. In such times, they can borrow money from the central banks at very low interest rates and pass it on at a higher price. After all, the banks are also supported by the state. In the end, it is the middle class that loses out the most. This is because inflation always affects the broad masses. They are not prepared for sudden price increases. Investors, on the other hand, usually know in advance that a crisis is looming. They invest their money elsewhere and thus ensure that their money increases in the best-case scenario during such a crisis. The currency reform. What are currency reforms and what characterizes them? What are the consequences of a currency reform? This will be explained in this chapter. A currency reform can have serious consequences. In a currency reform, the financial situation is turned completely upside down. This has already happened twice in Germany in the last 100 years. The first currency reform occurred after the First World War was financed. The state had issued massive amounts of government bonds in the course of the First World War. The loans could not be repaid because the state did not have enough revenue after the war. At the same time, both the economy and the government believed that inflation would help to get rid of the debt. In the end, however, the measure taken resulted in the price rising. The only way out was to carry out a currency reform. In order for this to succeed, the government introduced a transitional currency in 1923. This was formally backed by the Reich's real estate. A total of 1 trillion paper marks were converted into this Rentenmark. Prices fell again. The following year, the Reichsmark was introduced as a real currency. At least 40% of this was backed by gold or another currency. The economy was functioning again, and everything seemed to be in perfect order. However, when the German mark was introduced a few decades later, there was a problem. Society was hit hard by the introduction of the German mark. One of the reasons for this was that savers were expropriated. So what are the consequences of a currency reform? As the example of the German mark shows, a currency reform does not always have to be positive. On the contrary, different social groups are always affected by such a reform. Investors are not affected, as they have put their money aside elsewhere. Again, It is the middle class that is hit hardest by a currency reform. If your savings are expropriated by such a reform, your hands are almost tied. This is why many people are worried about the euro. If the eurozone collapses, there will be another currency reform. This currency reform would result in the middle class being severely affected. It could even lead to middle-class people having to live in poverty. The consequences are therefore obvious. Citizens lose confidence in the state. In Germany in particular, citizens have lost confidence in currency reforms. They have seen twice what a currency reform can do. That is why they want to avoid another one and are doing everything they can to ensure that a currency reform does not happen again. Once trust has been lost, it cannot be regained. That is why many people of the older generation still do not trust the euro. Ultimately, it is the fault of the state that such reforms are carried out. The currencies do not have sufficient coverage, which ultimately results in such a reform. The unequal distribution between rich and poor. The gap between rich and poor in Germany and the USA has never been as wide as it is today. In the coming years, it is expected that the middle class will continue to break apart. As a result, the gap between rich and poor will continue to widen. The richest 5% own almost all the wealth on earth. Time and again you hear the statement, "Yes, you have to be lucky to get rich." Unfortunately, this is not true. Not all of the people who belong to the richest 5% of humanity were lucky. It all depends on your mental attitude. If you tell yourself every day that you can't get rich, then exactly one thing will happen: nothing at all. You need to set yourself a specific financial goal and work towards it. This was the case with Warren Buffett, for example. He saved every cent he could so that he could create the empire he has today. This all started at a young age, as he set himself a financial goal very early on. This financial goal ultimately set him apart. Many people go to work, school, or training every day without knowing what they actually want in life. If you don't know what you want in life, life can't give you anything. Did you know that Bill Gates' first company was a failure? Too often, successful and rich personalities are reduced to their successes. However, these are usually people who have experienced a lot in their lives. Furthermore, they have often had to struggle with setbacks and have often had to start all over again. You are not born rich. You first think yourself rich, and then you can achieve it. If you have read the book Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, you will understand this concept. Because even if you were born into a wealthy family, this does not automatically mean that you will lead a wealthy life in the future. Because there is one thing you are not taught at school that is of crucial importance: financial intelligence. What is financial intelligence, and why is it so crucial to creating a wealthier life? Financial intelligence gives you a decisive advantage. You know how to invest your money and get added value from it. Many people are addicted to consumerism these days. Consumer debt piles up more and more every day. If you fall into such a trap, you have virtually no way out. You have to live with your situation and accept that you will lead a debt-ridden life. An ideal example of the application of financial intelligence is Warren Buffett. Einstein said back then that the compound interest effect was one of the greatest discoveries in the world. Nowadays, there is virtually no interest on savings accounts, but you can still invest your money elsewhere. The compound interest effect describes how you can build up a fortune in the long term. If you look at Warren Buffett's fortune, you will see that with the first million, the fortune has grown rapidly. Warren Buffett always planned his investments for the long term. In this way, he was able to ensure that he benefited from the returns that were distributed to him every year. However, he did not withdraw his returns, but left them in his securities account. As a result, the interest he received earned interest again. And that brings us to the compound interest effect. The sum continues to grow every year, while the interest keeps earning interest. Moreover, rich people generally have a rather modest appearance. Have you ever heard of the following quote? "The goal is to be rich, not to look rich." Some people should take this quote to heart. There are too many consumer goods in the world. Most of them are in the higher price range. But what's the point if you buy such a good and can't cover the cost with your salary? Exactly. Debt. A modest life doesn't always have to be a bad life. Spend money on spending more time with your family. And finally, get to the point where the money works for you. The entrepreneurial spirit of rich people characterizes them. They know how important setbacks are in life. While most people give up after the first setback, it's different for the richest 5% of the world. These people know that this setback is important, because only from setbacks can they learn what they can do better. You should take this to heart. You should also realize that we are living in the age of knowledge. In concrete terms, this means that it has never been easier to get the right information. You can get information everywhere. It has also never been easier to start your own business. You no longer need to invest a lot of capital. Do some soul searching and ask yourself what you are particularly good at. Once you have found an answer to this question, think about who you could help with this style. If you think carefully about this question, you will quickly realize that you can always sell your knowledge. You can do an online course or enrich companies with your knowledge. We have arrived in the age of services. Services are always linked to a wealth of knowledge. Take advantage of this and use your knowledge to create your own personal service. Also, set yourself a savings target. You should invest at least 10% of your salary each month. This 10% may seem very little at first, but if you take into account the sum that could arise after 7 years, for example, you will have accumulated a considerable amount. You should also consider the compound interest effect. Once you have fully understood these two things, you will have secured a decisive advantage. You will make your money work for you and build up a fortune. The fear of failure and the psychology of the masses. Why do some people manage to inspire the masses, while others can't even sell a product? Why are there such differences between different types of people? Quite simply, some people have the mental strength to achieve something while others do not. Fear should also be considered at this point. Many people find it difficult to do something uncertain because they are too afraid of failure. However, every single person has a fear of failure. Steve Jobs was also afraid of failure. If you have read his biography, you probably know that he was kicked out of his own company. This affected him emotionally. Feelings such as fear and diminished self-esteem come up faster than you might think. But fear did not dominate his life. After he was kicked out, he realized that he would be the boss of his company again at some point. The rest is history. Steve Jobs became the CEO of Apple again and changed the entire board. He introduced revolutions that no one could have dreamed of, and all because he refused to be defeated. Successful and rich people are usually the people who have failed the most in their lives. They failed with their first business or dropped out of university. But these people always had one thing in common. They had a clear vision of a future in which they had the success they wanted. This vision drove people to achieve something in their lives. This is the key difference that separates the successful people from the not-so-successful people. Do some soul-searching and ask yourself whether you have known the fear of failure from birth. The answer to this question will most likely be no. Most children are not afraid of failure. Just watch a child learning to walk. They fall down again and again, but they don't let it get them down. After falling down once, they don't ask themselves whether they could fail again. On the contrary, they have a clear attitude that they will not fail and carry on. This is anchored in children's subconscious. However, this attitude dissolves over the years. You will always find that certain things cause you anxiety, fear that you can't get rid of, and fear that can bring you to the end. When you learned to walk as a child, you took on full responsibility. Many people simply relinquish this responsibility over time. This is also the next tip for long-term success. If you trade on the stock market, you will notice time and again that countless people simply follow the trend. The greatest innovations have been achieved by not following the trend. So why do so many people still follow the trend today? The answer is quite simple. People have abdicated their responsibility. Nowadays, it is easier than ever to hand over responsibility. The German social security system provides really good protection. However, this protection often leads people to think that they no longer need to take as much responsibility for their own lives. If you fall into this trap, you fall into a real downward spiral. You won't be able to think entrepreneurially, nor will you be able to ensure that you really develop yourself. Avoid this trap and take full responsibility for your actions right from the start. You may have a tough time at the beginning, but it will definitely be worth it in the long run. You have all the strands in your hands, and you should take advantage of this. Regardless of whether you have to accept a loss or a gain, always take a learning with you. Successful and wealthy people are lifelong learners. Other people, however, only learn to get a job or complete their studies. We live in an age of knowledge. Knowledge on the entire planet is doubling at a rapid pace. So what happens if you stop learning at a certain point? Quite simply, your options in countless areas are severely limited. You no longer know what you can do. Your job opportunities will be limited. New professions are constantly emerging, so if you don't learn, you've as good as lost. Learning and dealing with responsibility is relatively easy to acquire. However, in order to really take on responsibility, you first have to get rid of your fear. Imagine the following situation. You are offered the opportunity to make a one-off investment. This investment brings you an unbeatable return. However, you have to pay in a large sum at the beginning, which is tied to the return over 5 years. If you are afraid now, you will miss out on a unique opportunity. The same applies to your profession. Imagine that you are to take over the management of a company, but now you don't feel up to the task and are afraid. This causes you to lose yourself. You don't take the job, and so you miss out on a unique opportunity. You won't see this opportunity again anytime soon, all because you don't know how to deal with fear. Successful people would take on any task and then familiarize themselves intensively with it. Because with the infinite sources of knowledge available today, you have a great advantage. You can educate yourself anytime and anywhere. If you have read between the lines, you will have already seen what the fear of failure destroys for you. Exactly, it destroys your own possibilities. These opportunities cannot be reproduced. In life, you will always have a limited number of opportunities. You will either be able to make use of them or not. If these opportunities slip through your fingers because of your fear, you have lost out. Many people want a better job or their own business. In order to realize this dream, you first have to take care of yourself. Because success also means getting to know your own personality. This is the only way to ensure your long-term success. If you've enjoyed the video so far, don't forget to like it. Subscribe to my channel and activate the bell to give the channel added value and support my channel for free. What do you think about the money now? You have now gained an initial insight into the history of money and should also understand why rich people have money and other people do not. Do you still think that money should not be talked about? Is money really such a negative factor in our lives? The answer to this question is no. Money is not a negative factor in our lives. On the contrary, people have made money a negative factor in their lives. The way we handle money has changed so that people blame capitalism. Yet capitalism is precisely the reason why so many people are able to live a good life. Imagine if the world were not capitalist. Because in principle, capitalism is not a bad form of economy. People's interpretation has led to a bad perception of capitalism. However, this does not have to be the case, because anyone can become wealthy. We live in the age of knowledge. With the right tools, you can market your own knowledge. The laws of the universe. Money alone is never enough to make you happy. Even rich people have realized this. A well-known example of this is John D. Rockefeller. Over the course of his life, he amassed a great deal of money. One day, he became very ill and had to go to hospital. He did not realize what was happening around him. It was only when he came face to face with death that he realized that life is not just about taking. Life consists of both giving and taking. He realized this after his serious illness and gave more than he could have dreamed of a few years ago. Steve Jobs also realized at the end of his life that he could have given even more. It won't do you any good to be rich on your own, because you will long for human values. Set yourself the following goal for the next year. Invest 10% of your income. However, this investment is not aimed at shares or other funds, but at people in need. You will increase your own money if you help. That's how the universe works, believe it or not. You should therefore simply follow this example and carry out the experiment. Within a few weeks, you will notice a change. This change will be reflected in your basic attitude. The gratitude of the people you help will return to you. You have probably already experienced it in a different way in your life. When you give something to someone, you are happier than when you receive a gift. But not only that. Basically, the joy is always greater when you do someone a favor and the person is happy. This is simply a basic human characteristic. The fact that one should not only take in the world is also anchored in numerous religions. In addition to Christianity, reference should be made here to Hinduism. In Hinduism, there is the basic idea of karma. What does karma actually mean, and how can you apply it? Karma is the basic idea that good things should be done in order to be reborn as a good person. Over time, this idea has not only become established in Hinduism, but is also practiced in many other societies. Look back at those circumstances in which you rejected a person or ignored them, even though they were in urgent need of help. You will realize that this situation came back to you one day. Another essential point is that all rich people want to give something back to the world. A prime example of this is Bill Gates. He has amassed a huge fortune over the years. However, over time he has become indifferent as to whether he can increase his fortune even more. He realized in his life that he had to give something back to humanity. Accordingly, he has set up a foundation. He wants to use it to donate almost his entire fortune to people in need. They will realize that wealth alone does not make them happy. Scientists have discovered that a certain income must be achieved in order to cover all needs. Once even these luxury needs have been met, people no longer have such a strong urge to earn even more money. The question that then arises is, what should you do with all the remaining money? Instead of spending it, it would be much nicer to make someone else happy with it. Human beings are naturally tied to social bonds. Accordingly, you should also allow these bonds to exist. You can try to lead a life in which you do nothing for your fellow human beings, but you will become increasingly unhappy over time. Don't believe this fact? Then you should try out two extreme examples. The first example is to ignore your entire environment. Try to ignore the people who are really close to you. After just a few days, you will notice that you become dissatisfied and unhappy. Now do exactly the opposite. Approach the people around you and talk to them. How do they react? You will be able to read the joy on the lips of those around you. If you only take, you will receive nothing from the world. However, if you give something first, the universe will be open to your wishes. Always make a small contribution, and you will be happier. Avoid the problem that many rich people have. These people have not learned that they also have to give something. You should avoid this problem at all costs and develop yourself personally. Money is not an essential aspect on the path to financial freedom. Much more important is the personal development that you undergo over time. Personal development is crucial on the path to becoming a true entrepreneur, because it is only when you build mental strength that you can make a difference in the world and withstand the situations and challenges you face on a daily basis. The financial intelligence. You have already read about this aspect in the previous sections, financial intelligence. But what does that mean? At school, you only learn how to work properly academically and how to develop in this way. But that is by no means all. After graduation, many people enter working life and don't know how the money system works. How can you save money if you don't know how the monetary system works? A simple, yet important question. To understand how the monetary system works, you need to learn the right techniques. Among other things, you should know how to invest money and how to increase it. First of all, it should be noted that the goal is not to look rich. On the contrary, the goal is to ensure that you have a fortune. Many people in this world fall into the consumer trap. The consumer trap is characterized by the fact that you buy more and more consumer goods that are not necessary for essential use. You should also bear in mind that today's world consists of a multitude of consumer goods. These goods cause you to lose yourself. What can help against this? Set yourself financial goals. With financial goals, you always have a decisive reason in mind as to why you are doing something. You should also make sure that financial goals will help you to meet your financial needs. To give you a better understanding of the example of financial intelligence, we will use several examples. Imagine that you have $1,000 at your disposal. What would you do with this money? A large number of people would spend this $1,000 on a consumer good. One example would be a new iPhone or another smartphone. However, you would also have the opportunity to build up your own small business with this money. This brings us back to the topic of fear. People tend to prefer to make a safe investment rather than take a small risk. However, this risk could pay off for them several times over in the long term, which they ignore. So how can you increase your financial intelligence? The following section describes 5 specific steps you can take to increase your financial intelligence. The first step is that you should save at every stage of your life. Whether you are a student or a trainee, set aside at least 10% of your income. Of course, it won't do you any good to save in a savings account. The interest rates are simply too low for that. You should make sure that you save money in a profitable way that you can invest later. This brings us to the second tip. You should never leave all the money you have saved in an account. What would happen to the money if there was a financial crisis? The money would lose value. To avoid this, you should invest your saved money elsewhere. Here, you should be prepared to take a higher risk. You can weigh up this risk at the beginning and then start an investment. The third tip is to draw up a sensible budget calculation. Write down both your expenditure and your income. How high are your expenses in relation to your income? How much money do you spend on consumption each month? These are key questions that you should and must address. Make a detailed financial plan to plan your expenditure and income. Now we come to the next step. How do you protect yourself? As you will see in the next chapter, today's pension is simply no longer enough. What do you do if you have to leave your job early? In such a case, your pension will not be enough. That's why you should start putting money aside as early as possible to protect yourself. Saving and investing is by no means enough. Look for a good way to provide for yourself in old age in the long term. What is worth more than the education and skills you have? Nowadays, it is important that you are able to adapt to new business situations and to realize your individual learned skills. To do this, you should always take care of your career and your education. At the end of the day, your education will always protect you, no matter what happens. Take steps to educate yourself early on. Learning is a lifelong process, and you should see it as such. You need to ask yourself what your market value is. Education drives up your market value, which is essential. With the right education and skills, you will have a huge advantage over your competitors and rivals. So invest in your education early to have great advantages in the long run. In addition to education, you should not avoid investing in your own personality. At the end of the day, mental strength will determine how well you cope in certain situations. If you ignore your mental strength, you will not be able to advance in your professional life. You should therefore invest in your own personality as early as possible. The world is evolving, and you should develop yourself in all possible areas accordingly. You need mental strength to make difficult decisions in your life. Work on this and reap the rewards of your work over time. How secure is the pension in Germany? Have you ever wondered how secure your pension is? You should consider this question if you want to plan for the long term. After all, it is not enough to build up assets. Short-term assets will not help you in the long term. That's why you should take care of your retirement provision early on. The standard solution when looking for a sensible solution is to take care of your pension. But how secure is a pension really? Have you ever heard of the term demographic change? This describes how many young people are available to finance the elderly. Of course, this is an abstract description of the actual term. However, the key point is that fewer and fewer young people in Germany are having to finance more and more older people. The number of older people is increasing due to significant developments in medicine. So in order for you to have a good pension in the future, there should also be more and more young people. But that is not the case. The pension system is therefore designed for the long term. It will change over the years or be abolished in favor of another system. Or you will have to work even longer than you do now. Experts also assume that the statutory pension scheme will face financial difficulties in just a few years. Analysts at the Bundesbank have come to this devastating conclusion. The Bundesbank's demand is quite simple. It wants the statutory retirement age to be raised. But be honest with yourself. Isn't it already far enough that you can only retire at 67? Do you really need to continue working? Many people refuse this demand, and that is understandable, as working hours should be limited after a certain age. But let's move on from the Bundesbank's demands to the actual calculations. The Bundesbank has calculated that the contribution rate for pensions will increase from 18.6% to a total of 26% by 2070. This corresponds to a radical increase, and in addition, the federal subsidy will increase again by the same amount. There are also age forecasts that indicate that people are getting older and older. It is assumed that the average age in 2070 will be around 69 years and 4 months. But that is by no means all. The government has different opinions on raising the retirement age. However, many pensioners cannot live on their pension. Why is that? It's simple. They didn't have enough income, so they have to resort to a mini-job to earn some extra money on top of their pension. This is not exactly pleasant when you consider that pensioners are getting older and older. In addition, inflation should not be ignored at this point. If you have read the previous chapters carefully, then you already know that the money is not covered by an equivalent value. This aspect in turn means that even your pension is not secure. We always have inflation. At the moment, inflation in the euro is 2% per year, so if you add this up, you will be short of a considerable sum when you retire. But what happens if, for example, hyperinflation occurs again? You can no longer be covered by Social Security funds. In the event of hyperinflation, money becomes worth nothing nationwide. As a result, your pension will also be worth next to nothing. In such a case, you no longer have any alternatives. You have to go back to work full-time or keep your head above water until the hyperinflation is over. Nobody can tell you when this will be over. This is because nobody knows when hyperinflation can occur and when it will disappear again. The best thing for you to do is to start investing sensibly at an early stage. This will protect you from the risks of a global financial crisis. This was the third part of the series. How does money and our global economic cycle work? I hope you enjoyed the video, so I would be very happy if you give me a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell. That way you won't miss any more videos from me and you'll be informed immediately when a new video is published. Thank you for watching the whole video and see you soon.